Okay, I think we can get started. Thanks a lot, everybody, for joining. Our topic today is going to be on reconciliation. So the last few sessions, just to kind of recap, we went through the process of installing OpenIAM. We've set up an AD connector. We've run a synchronization to import data from Active Directory into OpenIAM to build a user profile. And then on the last session, we went through a joiner, remover, levers type of processing. The next topic is then to kind of discuss, what reconciliation means, at least from an OpenIAM context, why it's important for you, and then also how we can go ahead and basically configure a reconciliation process. Right. Everything that we're going to be doing today is like our previous sessions. We're going to be building on what we've talked about in the past. If you have questions as we go, feel free to post them. Also, the session that we did last time, there was kind of quite a bit that we covered there. So if you have lingering questions from then, also feel free to post. The goal is to, make this topic a little bit more comfortable for everybody. So the best way that I can describe reconciliation is to really compare it with something that we already talked about, which is the last couple of sessions where we use the synchronization function. Okay. So in synchronization, it's a one-way transfer, right? We take data from a system, like a target, or from a source, and we bring that data into OpenIAM. We apply some rules to it, and we trigger off some downstream processing. Right? It's used largely to import data into OpenIAM or to drive a automated user lifecycle management process, right? So where we can provision and deprovision objects. The reconciliation process is, you can think of it as kind of a special case of synchronization, where instead of being a one-way flow of data coming from a system to OpenIAM, that this is more of a bidirectional process, where we're comparing data, which is in two systems, detecting differences in those data, and then taking some actions. So the main reason why we ever turn it on when we're doing our own projects is to basically maintain a level of control between two systems. So there was a question that was asked maybe 2 sessions ago, which is like, how do we maintain control that data is not being updated outside of OpenIAM, and what do we do? So the answer to that question is reconciliation, where we can have controls in place, to maintain a level of to ensure that the data that we have in each place it's got some checks and balances around it. Right? So if we look at now, the other thing about reconciliation to keep in mind is that it is a significantly heavier process than synchronization. So what I mean by that is synchronization is relatively fast. It's a one-way flow, whereas because this is a back and forth, we're comparing data. It's a much slower process, and also the kind of things that we can do with it, since they're more complex, it's a more time-consuming process to run, and we should keep that in mind, and where we turn this on. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what the flow of information would kind of look like. So, and we'll look at this in a little bit more detail when we look at the IAM configuration of this. So when we define a reconciliation process, there's 2 filters that we define. There's a filter for on the IDM side, with the OpenIAM side, and then there's a filter on the target system. So let's say that that OpenIAM is your IDM system, and AD is your target. So there will be a filter that's defined on the OpenIAM side, which will basically say which users do you want to have involved, in this reconciliation process. And so that filter would basically then take all the users that match that criteria and take the identities for those applications. And then it will compare them to see if they exist in AD. If we leave that filter out, it means use all users. Okay. And the target system, we have the similar query there, where it's going to define which users in that application do we want to have involved in this reconciliation process. And the reason we want this flexibility is that you may not want to do this on the full user population. Maybe in production you do, but maybe in testing you want to have control where you can, test in an OU or test a department's worth of users, right? So this gives us the control that we can do that. So then the other part is that when we, for each record that we have, right, we're going to be using the matching attributes that are defined. So it's the field name in OpenIAM, and it's going to be the source attribute name in your target. Right? And then when it finds that the data is there isn't a match, then the rules that we see, what we call situations, are going to kick in. So the screenshot that I've kind of included here, it basically runs through a few common scenarios. So one scenario is that a record has been deleted in IDM, but it exists in the target system. And our response is really, what should we do under that scenario, right? And a similar, second scenario is that it exists in both, which means that, we found a match, but they're really different. And that's a scenario that we're going to run through on our demo today. Right. And then another scenario could be that it exists in IDM, but not in your target system, your AD. So what should we do in that case, right? So we can have a response or a behavioral response for each one of these conditions. And the other part is, what do we do if it's in IDM and it's in it's in your target, right? It's a slightly different case in the first one where the record was in a different state, whereas the last case is saying that the record doesn't exist at all, right? Now, the other thing which we need to keep in mind is that when we're doing this, that, we may have configured a bunch of business rules as well, from the previous operations, right? The joiners, movers, leavers process. So as we bring data in, it's conceivable that some of the changes that we may apply on the IDM side may trigger off those business rules. So we need to make sure that our reconciliation processes can coexist with our synchronization processes, and they're not kind of stepping on each other and causing adverse effects. Okay. So this is just more of a pictorial view of how the data flows. So in this case, there's only one difference really from some of the other diagrams that we looked at. So for example, when we looked at synchronization, we had a synchronization service, and then we had connectors, and they were talking to the system. So in this case, the synchronization service has been replaced with the reconciliation service. And it's again using the connectors to go grab data in those target systems. And then the comparison that happens will be against the OpenIAM repository, right? Which is just a relational database that we have. Okay. So this part, there's a lot of consistency in, in how reconciliation works versus how synchronization works. They're really not, that radically different. Let's just jump over to the OpenIAM screen itself. So the first thing we need to do, so we're in the web console, and we're going to go into the provisioning menu option and go to manage system, just like we did early on when we were setting up the connector. And so here, let's go to our AD connector. We go to actions. And it's the reconciliation option on the side, right? This is the only one on the managed system that we haven't really done. So if you look at this, first of all, at a high level, we see each one of our reconciliation processes, and we see that we have one for users, we have one for groups, and there's actually a second one so there's really, you can have more than one configuration that's there. Again, and if you do that, just make sure they don't step on each other, right? So just make sure that if you're running, two different reconciliation processes on the same task, that they're not running at the same time, running on the same objects, and then just generally creating a mess when you do that, okay? So let's just take the first one and just kind of go through the configuration. So like with the synchronization, we can pick the kind of object, right? So if we were to do a new, you would pick the type of object that you wanted to reconcile. Second, we define the frequency. So here, we made it a little bit. Um, it's not as configurable as the synchronization was, where we have a cron expression. So here we just gave people some predefined intervals, and generally this has been flexible enough for most people. I would recommend, unless there's a real need to be running this, with high frequency, run it, once a day. It's generally enough in most environments to be able to keep them in check. If you turn on a heavy process and you have many managed systems, you're going to start creating performance issues for yourself, which there may not be a real need for it, right? So kind of balance out what your needs are with what your configuration is. For example, I saw an environment the other day where they had 400 users in the company. There's probably 2 or 3 joiners every week, but they're running a synchronization process from AD into OpenIAM every 30 minutes, right? There's hardly ever any changes in most of those. So they could have effectively run it once a day and achieve whatever they needed to without creating that much load on the system. Okay, so just kind of keep those things in mind. Second thing is that we may want to define some notifications. So this is optional, so you don't have to include that there. But in this case, I want to be able to get a report, and so this will notify, so let's say you have a service account which you want to be able to keep a log that reconciliation or synchronization worked, and you wanted to send notifications to, so you can kind of define a distribution list or a mailbox where you can send this to, right? And then there's a thing that says to send a report about the what we're calling do nothing cases. Do nothing cases, probably not the best English, but it really refers to cases where we found a difference, but we don't want to do anything about it. And in some environments, it takes a little while for people to gain trust of the IAM system, right? So in this case, when they find differences, they want to be able to be notified, and they want to review it, and someone will take manual action, to correct it. Right. So this gives us the option to just kick off that report to be able to send to people. The next thing is we have some scripts. Now, in this case, this gives us a little bit of flexibility in terms of how we work with each one of our target systems. And in this particular case, there really isn't anything to do. I think if you look at the script, it's just a pass-through. There's nothing there, right? So, and if you're using the out-of-the-box connectors, you won't have to do anything, for these scripts, right? So the next thing is that we need to define a filter for your target system. So if you remember when we were working with AD in particular, with the PowerShell connector, a couple of sessions ago, that we had these commandlets that were, mapping to an AD. So there was AD, there was get AD user, there was AD get AD group, and then there was get AD, I think it was a computer, right? And then we pass in some parameters. The same concept holds true here. We're using these commandlets, and we're passing in some parameters. Also, what we mentioned last time was this type of using the star is a little bit lazy, and you should really, enumerate what your the attributes that you want kind of being used in the evaluation, right? Because it's a little bit better on the performance side. And if you have a large deployment and you want to kind of take those things into account, you don't want to create unnecessary load, when there's other competing resources going on. So in this case, we're really going to be comparing one user because I don't want to run through, a longer process on a session. And then the second filter is really about, the searching on the OpenIAM side. And again, this query you can pretty much leave out. You don't need to do anything with the script. And in this case, we've actually got a filter which is not going to match anything. So in this case, it's going to result in an empty list on the OpenIAM side. But we could have locked this down to say just use one specific user and to do a comparison. Right. So this gives us some flexibility in terms of how we're going to structure this, right? In terms of our, validating the reconciliation process works, and so our our unit testing configuration could be quite different than our production setting here. Okay, then the next couple of fields are really about which attributes we're going to compare to know that we are talking about the same user. So in this case, the OpenIAM field here is the managed system principal. That's the identity of the application. So for example, if you are say working with a Linux box or a Oracle database, or even say a cloud application, the identity of that application is going to be stored as a managed system account. It just there's a one-to-many relationship between the user and the managed systems. And then the source system in this case is the same account name. Now this value would be different if it was we're talking about even if it was LDAP, this was a database or a Linux server or any this will vary from target system to target system. So you just keep that in mind. And then since we know that every environment is going to be, a little bit different, we do have the option to be able to send out or to have different kinds of rules where we can, let's say, matching on a single attribute isn't enough. So we can maybe combine multiple attributes. Okay. And then this is basically just saying, how we want that report to be sent. And as with the synchronization process, we have a pre and a post processor. These both run once in the cycle. So the preprocessor runs before reconciliation starts, and preprocessor runs after the reconciliation has been completed. Right? There might be cases where you want to do some additional processing. So this will give you that flexibility. But the real work is all being done down here. It's the situation such, right? This is the thing that we talked about on our when we're going through the slides is the behavior to take under certain conditions. So in this first scenario, we're really saying that the only scenario that we care about is when two records exist, one in IDM and one on the resource side, and we want to be able to do nothing, right? So the record in question here is going to be this guy, the recon test web user. So if I go into my Windows box and I've already pulled this up. I've got my my AD user management tools open, and if I look at this recon, right? What we did was we modified two users. Two fields. One is the last name here that's been changed, and I believe there's one more that's been changed as well. So basically the value in the OpenIAM side is just test web, right? So now if we run the reconciliation, we should see that there's a difference. So let's go back to our screen, and we can just say save and reconcile. And in a minute or so, I should get an email notification saying that reconciliation has been complete and what the outcome of this was. Okay. So let's let's just go directly into this. So the first notification tells me that the process was finished, and the second one tells me where I can go get the report to go see this. So this is taking me back into OpenIAM, and it says that it found the user. And so if there were more people involved, you would see a full list of identities, and you would say, basically saying that the difference is we found this record in both, but they're different. And if I open this up, I will see that both the title and the last name are different. And so it's showing me what the difference is between these two fields. Right? So, and if we want to, so imagine that this is for a larger user population, and you will get the full, list of people, right? So, and the differences could be, much more depending on what our configuration is. Okay. Now, if I wanted to come to this report on my own and not go through that email link, under administration, there is a menu option called reconciliation history down here. So this shows me all the times the reconciliation is run. This is the last time that we ran it, and it gets me to the same place. Okay, so you don't need to rely on that email notification to be able to get here. You can go in right from the web console as well. Okay, so the next thing is we're going to do the same thing, except we're going to have the system take corrective action this time. So we go back to our reconciliation screen. So we're using a different user because just for demo purposes, right? So we use Raycon test user 2, and you'll notice that everything else is the same, right? And in this case, we set update IDM from the resource, right? So let's also, just for test purposes, let's go look at this user. And let's just change this to be something like that. So this is effectively, this configuration is basically saying that you want to trust you want to trust the changes which are being made directly in your target system, and it's okay to update the IAM system with it. Okay. So let's also change the notification here. And at this point, let's go ahead and kick this off. Okay. So this will take a second and it will come through, and we should see that OpenIAM getting updated with those changes. Okay. Okay, so this is finished. We'll see one more notification. Actually, we won't see the notification because we asked it to update it. Okay. So let's go and pull up that user again. Okay, something didn't go right. I should track down what happened there. But anyway, that's the main objective here in terms of what we need to do on the reconciliation side. You can make these a little bit more elaborate in terms of your, of the changes, and also the everything that we run here is also going to be in the log viewer as well. So the reconciliation that we did, so that the change that I made here, the searching, all of them are being logged here as well. And that's pretty much all that there is in terms of setting up reconciliations. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, next time we'll move on to. So the question is, same account name is applicable to this. Sorry, reconciliation is applicable to the same account name also. It's a good question. So normally we don't want to have your matching attribute to be the one that's involved in the if you wanted to include same account name as an attribute that can be changed during reconciliation, then it should not be the key that you match on, right? Because if you change it, then your matching key is basically it's gone, right? So in that case, I would say you may want to do something else, like maybe use employee ID or some other attribute or a group of attributes to be able to do that match, right? So that's something to kind of keep in mind, that if the attribute that you think are going to be matching on, there's a chance that it can actually mutate, then we should do something. We shouldn't. It's probably not a good attribute to be able to match on, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing also where we can use reconciliation is sometimes admins will go into AD and they may change group memberships or they may move people to different OUs. And those are perfectly valid cases where we can use reconciliation to keep OpenIAM in sync to gain that update, right? That update that happened in AD. Now, the counter argument is that if the flow that you're going to use is going to be a one-way flow, meaning that you never see a case where a change made in AD or your target system directly is going to get updated with data from OpenIAM, or you don't need a report, you just need to propagate those changes into OpenIAM, then I would say a much more efficient way of doing it is to use the synchronization tools, because it's just a one-way update and you don't need to use reconciliation for it. Okay. Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, if there's no other questions, then I think we can close the call. Thanks a lot for everybody for joining. I think next time we'll be kind of shifting gears and looking at the self-service portal and looking at request approval.